I'm a tough-as-nails judge known for never letting my emotions show. But the day two young siblings stood in my courtroom with a desperate plea changed everything. Their voices trembled as they said, "Please adopt us, sir." Their words cracked through the walls I'd built around myself over years of handing down verdicts and upholding the law. The courtroom fell silent. The older one, a boy named Daniel, held his sister's hand tightly, his protective stance both heartbreaking and inspiring. "We've been in 4 homes already," he added. "We just want one." His sister, Lily, nodded beside him, her eyes wide and filled with a mix of hope and fear. They stood so small and vulnerable in the vast, imposing courtroom that suddenly felt unbearably cold. I cleared my throat, trying to summon the professional detachment that had served me so well. "Why would you ask me to adopt you?" I asked, my voice unintentionally harsher than intended. "Because you're the only one who seems to care," Daniel said. "We won't cause any trouble. We promise." For a moment, I was frozen, caught between their raw emotion and the flood of memories I'd kept buried for years. My hands gripped the gavel as if it could anchor me, but nothing could shield me from the truth. Their plea dredged up a past I'd spent decades avoiding. The mistakes, the regrets, the children I had failed. "This court will take a recess," I announced, my voice cracking slightly. I rose abruptly and retreated to my chambers, leaving the stunned courtroom behind. Inside the quiet of my office, I leaned heavily against my desk. The twins' faces wouldn't leave my mind. Their hopeful eyes, their trembling voices, it was too much. It reminded me of another case, years ago, when I had followed the letter of the law instead of my conscience. A mother lost her children that day. A little boy. He didn't survive the system I'd upheld so rigidly. That failure had haunted me ever since. A knock at the door startled me. Emily, my clerk, peeked inside. "You okay, Judge Carter?" she asked, her voice tentative. "It's the twins," I admitted. Their words, they hit harder than I expected. I straightened, adjusting my robe. "Pull their full case history," I added. "I need to understand what's really going on here." Emily nodded and disappeared. Moments later, she returned with a thick file. I flipped through the pages, scanning the twins' tragic history. Neglect in their first home, abuse in their second, an indifferent foster family in their third. Their current placement, with the Fergusons, showed no outright abuse, but the report described minimal emotional support and a home filled with more children than the family seemed capable of handling. That night, I couldn't sleep. Their story, their voices, stayed with me. I'd spent my career priding myself on impartiality, on enforcing the law without letting emotions cloud my judgment. But this wasn't about emotions. This was about doing what was right. The next morning, I entered the courtroom determined to dig deeper. "In the matter of Daniel and Lily Thompson," I began, my voice steady, "this court will not issue an immediate renewal of the current foster placement." Gasps rippled through the room. The Fergusons' attorney stood immediately, sputtering objections, but I silenced him with a sharp look. "This court requires additional time to review their case. The well-being of these children takes precedence." Over the next week, I delved into the Fergusons' history. They'd fostered over 30 children in 10 years, always maintaining maximum capacity. While there were no official complaints, subtle patterns emerged. Children withdrawn, struggling in school, showing signs of emotional neglect. Yet the Fergusons received glowing reviews from the agency, likely because they followed the rules to the letter. I knew I needed more. Emily worked tirelessly, reaching out to social workers who had visited the Fergusons' home. One, a woman named Rachel, shared troubling observations. "They meet basic needs, but there's no warmth. The kids are just there." Rachel's voice trembled as she spoke about Daniel and Lily. "They're just numbers to the Fergusons. But those kids? They're special. You can see it in how they protect each other. They deserve more." I called an emergency hearing. The Fergusons' attorney argued fervently for their clients, citing their record of compliance. But then Rachel testified, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. She described the lack of emotional care, the overwhelming number of children, the isolation she'd witnessed. Finally, I turned to the twins. "Daniel, Lily, is there anything you'd like to say?" Daniel rose, his sister's hand firmly in his. "We just want to be somewhere we can stay," he said. "Somewhere we can be a family." Lily nodded. "We don't want to keep moving. We just want to belong. Their words silenced the courtroom. My decision wasn't easy, but it was clear. The Fergusons' placement is hereby terminated, I announced. This court will oversee a search for a permanent home. The Fergusons stormed out, furious, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt I'd done something meaningful. But the hard part wasn't over. Over the next month, I searched for a solution. Emily and I reviewed potential adoptive families, but none seemed right. Meanwhile, Daniel and Lily were placed in a group home. I visited often, bringing small gifts, a sketchbook for Lily, gardening tools for Daniel. Slowly, they began to open up. Daniel spoke of planting flowers with his mother before she passed. Lily showed me her drawings, delicate and full of hope. One day, Rachel approached me with an idea. "There's a couple," she said. "The Martins. They've been waiting years to adopt. They're teachers, great with kids. They might be the right fit." I arranged a meeting at a park. The Martins arrived nervous but warm, carrying a picnic basket and small gifts for the twins. Daniel, ever protective, was wary at first. But Mr. Martin complimented his gardening knowledge, and soon they were discussing soil types. Lily remained quiet until Mrs. Martin admired her sketches. "You're so talented," she said. "Have you ever thought about painting?" The twins' walls began to crumble. By the end of the afternoon, Daniel was smiling, and Lily had tucked one of her sketches into Mrs. Martin's bag. I watched from a distance, a lump in my throat. Could this really work? The legal process took months. The Martins' background checks, home visits, interviews. It was exhausting, but worth it. Finally, the day came. The adoption was finalized in a small private ceremony. Daniel and Lily stood beside the Martins, their faces glowing with a joy I'd never seen before. "You're our family now," Daniel said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Forever," Lily added, slipping her hand into her new mother's. I watched from the back of the room, my heart full. For once, I allowed myself to feel the emotions I'd kept buried for so long. This was why I'd become a judge, not for the rules, not for the power, but for moments like this. As the Martins led the twins out, Daniel glanced back. "Thank you," he said. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made every struggle, every sleepless night, worthwhile. I nodded, unable to speak. The courtroom felt warmer now, filled not just with justice but with hope. For the first time in years, I felt I'd truly made a difference. A week later, I found myself visiting the Martins' home. They'd invited me for dinner, eager to show me how Daniel and Lily were settling in. The house was modest, but filled with warmth. The scent of lasagna wafted from the kitchen, and laughter echoed from the backyard. When I stepped outside, I saw Daniel showing Mr. Martin how to plant marigolds, his hands covered in soil. Lily was sitting on the porch with Mrs. Martin, painting with a set of watercolors. The scene felt like a dream, a family finally complete. "Judge Carter," Lily called out when she saw me. "Look," she held up her painting, a vibrant depiction of their garden. "It's going to be beautiful." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "It already is." As I sat down to dinner with the Martins and the twins, I couldn't help but think of all the children still waiting for their chance. This was one victory, but it wasn't enough. That night, I stayed up drafting a proposal for a program that would prioritize the emotional needs of foster children, ensuring they didn't become just another number in the system. It was time to do more.